Okay, one thing that you are required to create in this course is a portfolio. That is one of the projects that you have. If you notice on the syllabus, portfolio counts for 5 points, but 2 times. You'll turn in the first part of the portfolio and then the second part of the portfolio. A portfolio is a collection of the things that you've done. All right. Many times, web developers, web designers create portfolios to showcase their skills online. That's the nice thing about web development is you can actually showcase your work online and people can view your work to get a sense of what your skills are. So for example, if we were to go Google web developer portfolio, we can see some examples. I wonder if there's an actual link to it. There we go. All right, here's an example of it. And it might be hard to see on the screen, but there's a very subtle animation running underneath that on the background. There's a paragraph that talks about the person's goals. There's a list of projects. There's how to contact the person. And there's some information about the person. Their Twitter, their Instagram, and so on down the line, and some of the accomplishments that they've had. Contact would have their email address, I believe, and projects would show a list of projects that they've worked on. So this is a project that the person has worked on. So animation to start, and so on. Now, there's portfolios that you can create for a number of reasons. There's a portfolio that you can create to market yourself. So if you're a web developer and you want to, and you're freelancing and you want to showcase your skills, or if you're a web developer that's simply looking for a job anywhere at an organization, you might want to create a portfolio. In the case of a portfolio, what you would probably do is you'd probably pick out the 2 or 3 projects that you've completed that you think best showcases your skills. So this person has about 8 different projects on here. You wouldn't necessarily have to show all of your projects. If you worked on a project and you're not particularly proud of it, then you wouldn't have to put it in a marketing portfolio. You would just put the things on there that are you feel was most relevant to showcasing your skills. Now, in the case of a student looking for a job, it's okay to use student projects, but just be sure that you clearly label them as student projects. All right, so that they understand that they're not actually commercial projects that you've worked on. There's the other kind of portfolio, or another kind of portfolio, is for educational purposes. And for educational purposes, it's really a chance for students to reflect back on what they've done throughout a course and see the progress that they've made. Sometimes it's hard to appreciate just how much that you've learned in a course without having some actual tangible artifact to look at. So what we're going to do on our portfolio is we're going to include all of our labs. All right, the first part of the portfolio will be the labs up to that point. I think it will be labs 1 through 6. And then the final version of the portfolio will contain all the labs that you work on for this course. Now, What should your portfolio look like? Well, this gives, for one thing, your portfolio itself only needs to be one page. You don't need a separate info and contact page. You could put all that on your home page. So what I would suggest having is a page that describes you and your goals in web development. So sort of combine the home page and the projects page of this one, along with projects that you've worked on. So it might look something like this. Now, I haven't done any styling with this, of course. Maybe we'll work on that today. Maybe we'll work on styling this example today. But you have, your name, portfolio, then you have a paragraph about your goals. Sort of like this person has a paragraph about their goals and their skills that sort of summarizes them. You have a little paragraph about that in yours. And then you have your example homework lab assignments. And you'll have a link to the lab along with some of your thoughts on that particular lab. Now, I just made something up in this case. I said lab 1. Maybe I learned that you have to put ending tags in. Maybe that caused me problems in the lab assignment. And reflecting back, it was like, oh yeah, this gave me a hard time when I forgot to have an ending tag. So I'm going to always remember to put ending tags in. When you click on the link, it will take you to that lab. All right, this example. And there'll be a link back to the portfolio. That's very important. There should be a link from your portfolio to the project, and there should be a link from the project back to the portfolio homepage. Now, if you consider 6 assignments and CSS files and images and all that, it would get mighty cluttered if you put everything in the same folder. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about separating stuff into their own folders. So if you look at my portfolio example out on the disk, notice I have my portfolio homepage here, index.html, and then I have a separate folder for each lab. And that's the best way to do it. Have a separate folder for each lab. All right. Then you need to link to that folder. Now, so far, we've only considered how to link to a page if it's in the same folder. Now we're going to look to how to link to a page if it's in a different folder. So if we look at the code for this, notice that we're going from the portfolio homepage to FAQ.html that is in the lab 1 folder. We're going to use what's called the relative address to get there. So to get to the page, I have to put in the folder name first and then the name of the page. If this was in the same folder, if that FAQ.html was in the same folder as this, all we'd have to do is put FAQ.html. But because it's in a different folder, all we have to do is put in lab1/FAQ.html. And that will take us first down to the lab 1 folder and then pull up the FAQ.html. Same thing for lab 2, which is in the lab 2 folder. Lab2/FAQ.html will take us to the FAQ page that is in lab 2. Now, the other thing that you're going to have to do besides organizing this stuff is you're going to need to create a link back to your portfolio. So if I go to lab 1, I have a link that says go to portfolio home. Now, in that case, we're not going down to a directory, we're going up to the parent directory. And when we do that by saying /index.html. So to go down a directory, we put in the name of the directory. To go up a directory, we put in .. and then the name of the file. So this will take us from the FAQ page in the Lab 1 folder up to the index page that's in the main folder. So creating a portfolio really isn't a giant task. The steps involved are organizing all your pages into organizing all your pages into their own folders, creating a home portfolio page, creating links to the assignments, and then creating links from the assignments back up to the portfolio page. That's the only change you need to make to the assignments that you've turned in, is you need to create a link back to the home portfolio page. Now, you can use this now anytime you want to separate things into different directories. So for example, if I had an image that was in an images folder, I could do something like image source equal image.jpg or images / pic.jpg. Something like that. That will take me down to the images folder and use the image called pic.jpg contained within that folder. Now, one thing that you do not have to do, and I've seen some of you do this, but is put in the full path, like C. Put in something like this. All right. You should never have an address of a page or an image or a CSS file or anything look like this, because this will literally only work on this computer. And if you upload it and I try to view it on my computer, it's not going to work because I don't have all those folders on my machine. So we're going to be using what's called the relative path to files. Relative path simply means if they're in the folder, all you need, they're in the same folder, all you need is the image name. If they're in a folder down below, all you need is the name of the folder, just the name of that folder, not the full path to that folder, but the name of the folder / and then the name of the image or the name of the web page or whatever. All right. And if it's in the folder up, all you need is a .. Don't get confused and put the / in here. In web development, it's always the /, regardless if you're on Windows or Mac or what. Now, keep in mind that this is really bare bones for a portfolio. All I have is HTML and no CSS. That's not what you'd want to turn in. All right. You would want to turn in something that looked really good, because you're going to be using these typically to showcase your skills. Now, we're using ours in class to sort of document your learning. But for many portfolios, you'd be showcasing your skills, in which case you would want to showcase your skills the best way you can. So you would make it as good as you possibly can. So the first draft of the portfolio is due probably in a few weeks. October 5th. So it's actually due, not this week, but next week. And it'll include all the web pages that you've created so far. Paragraph about you and your goals. And then links to them with a little bit of commentary about each page. You can make this elaborate as you want to. Remember, this is your opportunity to show off your web development skills. All right. What we're going to do for the next several classes is to talk about CSS quite a bit. We've kind of introduced you to CSS. But now we're going to go into more detail. And the first thing that we're going to consider is what's called the CSS Box Model. All right. Let's look at this portfolio, and we're going to use this portfolio in our example today. We have in the body of the page, we have a header, we have a section, and we have a footer. Each of those are giant boxes in the screen. This box that goes around here is the header. This box that goes around here is the section. This box here is the footer. Think of them as being rectangles, and they go all the way across the page. I'm going to put some Greek text in for my paragraph, simply to show you how it goes all the way across the page, the box. Greek text is acceptable in a prototype. It's not acceptable in a final version of something. So don't turn in your portfolio with Greek text in it. That's not correct. You would want to put the actual text of what you are creating. Now for your project, when you have to design a prototype, then it would be okay to put Greek text in if you didn't know exactly what you're going to say. So now if we look at the portfolio, we'll notice that this box for this paragraph goes all the way across the screen. That's what I mean by the CSS box model. These big tags, these block tags, and a block tag is a tag that forms a triangle, all right, or not a triangle, a rectangle across the page. And starts on a new line. Those are block tags. Inline tags are tags that appear next to each other. For example, a link tag is an inline tag. We don't start the link on a new page or on a new line. It's just in line with everything else. So that would be an example of an inline tag. This one right here. Whereas an LI is a block tag. Every LI starts on its own line. So it's a block tag. So the CSS we're talking about now in the box model deals with block tags. All right. So in this case, the header, the section, and the footer are all giant boxes. All right. And we can do things to those boxes to style them. All right. Right now, the styling is pretty boring. We haven't done anything to anything on this page, really. There is no CSS. So what we're going to do is we're going to start putting some style here, and we're going to demonstrate the aspects of the CSS box model. All right, so I'm going to create my style sheet file. And I'm going to say link rel equals style sheet, type equals text/CSS, href equals style.css. I'm going to call it main.css because this is the main style for my portfolio. Now I'm going to create this main style in the same folder as the web page is. So all I have to do is say main.css. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to create a new file. Main.css. And nothing happened. There we go. I'm going to call it main.css. All right. Now, my suggestion for you in creating a portfolio is that you keep things fairly neutral. Although, I don't know, if your personal style is to be very colorful and your designs reflect that, maybe you'd want to have a colorful portfolio page. So I guess I changed my mind, do something that sort of matches your personality. I'm going to create my style sheet very neutral. All right, so I'm going to be using neutral colors, and I'm going to just use different, black, white, and gray on my page, different shades of gray. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to I want the whole body have a background color of gray. And if I look, there's I could pick dark gray or whatever. But I have more control of that. If I wanted it to be a very light gray, I could put the hex code in. And remember, these digits go from 0 to F. So FF would be the highest number for the red, green, and blue. If I said AA, that would be a very light gray because I have the red, green, and blue all turned up very high. The little color swatch that they put in is just a feature of Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to make sure it works. So I put the style sheet tag in, and I put this in. I'm going to make sure that it works before I start getting more into the style sheet. So there we go. Maybe I want it lighter still. My suggestion in doing any kind of programming is to do a tiny piece at a time. I've seen people create gigantic CSS files with all kinds of style rules in them, and when they try it, it doesn't work. and they get confused why it doesn't work. And they've spent a lot of work trying to make a style sheet and it's not working. That can be very difficult to debug because you're looking for a problem in hundreds of lines of code. It's much easier to look for a problem in 3 or 4 lines of code. All right. So if this didn't work, then either something's wrong with this line or something's wrong with this line. There's only 2 things that could go wrong here. So I make sure that that CSS file is applying before I go in and try and do anything else. All right. Now, the header, section, and footer are all boxes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a border around all those boxes. I'm going to start with the header. I'm going to make the border width 1 pixel. I'm going to make the border color black. We're going to use our hex code. That would be #0000. All the lights are off. And a border style, solid. How did I know all these things? I know all these things because I've done this a million times. All right? You haven't done this a million times, so how will you know this? Well, you're going to learn it. You're not going to learn everything about CSS, but you're going to learn the things that you do often. All right? And if I want to know how to put a border on something, I did CSS border. I could go and find a reference. Like, for example, here are the different kinds of border styles you can have. They show you an example and how to use them. Now, when I do this and save it, I get a border around the header. Now, as I mentioned, that header extends all the way across the screen. It's a box. It's a box. It's a block tag, so it's a box that extends all the way across the screen by default. All right? Now I can put borders around the other 2 things on the page. So I'm going to say section. Here I can take a shorthand. I don't have to say border width, border color, border style. I can just say border 1 pixel, black, solid. All right. How do I do that? Well, these are called shorthand attributes. They're usually the stuff before the dash. And notice 1 pixel. The browser's smart enough to know that 1 pixel must mean the width. 1 pixel, 1 px is not a valid color. Black is not a valid width. Solid is not a valid width or a valid color. Therefore, it figures out that 1 pixel must be the width, black must be the color, and solid must be the type. And it doesn't matter what order we put these in. is smart enough to figure that out. So I can save this. And now I have a border around the main section. Finally, I have I can put one for the footer. Which I could do like this. And they'll both get the same style rule. Or I could give it its own style rule. All right. So I have my 3 boxes, my 3 big block tags. Notice a few things about them. All right. The browser defaults kick in. How wide is it? Well, it covers the entire width of the screen. How much space is there between the boxes? There's no space. How much space is there between the border and the text? There's no space. How much space is there between the edge and the border? The space right here. Well, there's a little bit of space. Remember, if you don't specify something, the browser defaults kick in. So your page is always going to be a combination of what you've defined in CSS plus the browser defaults. Now, there's different things that we can do to make this page or to make these boxes stand out more and give them a better appearance and so on. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some space between the border and the text. Notice right here, the L in lorem is right bumped up against the border. This bigger. Bumped right up against the border. The M in Mike is right up against the border. No space whatsoever. The property that controls that is called the padding. So I can say padding 5 pixel, and that will put 5 pixel spacing between the border and the text. Oh, my mistake. I didn't want that on body. I wanted that on header. So notice there's a space between the border and the M. It's 5 pixels. There's space between the L and the border. The bigger I give it, the bigger the gap is. Now I have expanded this page just for readability's purposes, but the same thing applies. Notice how much better that looks than when you have everything crammed right up against the border. Now, we can actually give a different padding on the top, the right, the left, and the bottom. So I could say padding top 15 pixels. padding left, 20 pixels. Padding right, 3 pixels, 2 pixels. Padding bottom, 100 pixels. And each side then will get a different padding. Big padding on the bottom, not so big on the right, medium side on the left, and well, the top padding, there's something else coming into play here too, but there's space on the top as well. So you have control. You can have complete control if you want to. Usually when I do this, frankly, I just use the one padding value and just give a padding to all 4 sides at the same time. You'll see this is true in almost in many of these box attributes. You can give them to everything, all 4 sides, or you can give them to one side at a time. For example, I could put a border only on the bottom of this box. If I wanted to. It's hard to see, but get rid of this for a second. That border only exists on the bottom now because I specified border bottom, border bottom width, color, and style. Or I can give to each of these all of the properties at once, but simply by saying border bottom. So this is true with padding as well. I could do the padding on the bottom, the padding on the top, right, left, and so on. I'll give each of these the border and the padding. And remember, I can combine the border into one style rule if I want to. So now the border and the padding is copied in all 3 of my blocks. Now the next thing we have is we have the space between the blocks. Notice how these blocks are smashed together. What we can do for that is we can do the margin. That'll put space between them. So I'm going to put a margin of 40x on the header. And what that does is that puts in 40 pixels between the side and the top of this one. So it gives us 40 pixels all the way around. Notice as I make the browser bigger or smaller, the page resizes itself. That can be somewhat bothersome to web designers that want to get things looking precise and exact, but that's actually a blessing that you don't have to worry about resizing the page. The browser will do it for you. Now, interestingly enough, if I put 40 on as a margin for all of these, it doesn't increase the margin to here. You might think that this one has a bottom margin of 40, this one has a top margin of 40. That's called margin collapsing. What it does is it says, well, this needs to be 40 pixels away from whatever its neighbor is. This one needs to be 40 pixels away. Well, I just need to make them 40 pixels and they'll both be 40 pixels away. Other thing I can control is the height, or height and width. Generally, I'm not going to control the width too much because I want it to take up as much space as it needs, but I will probably control the width. So I could say width equals 600 pixels. And that's what I get. This is 600 pixels wide. Notice that sort of messed up the margin because it can't have 40, it can't both make the width 600 pixels and make the margin 40 pixels, so the browser picks one. So it's no longer centered. Well, if I add this to the margin, it will center it. I can specify margin, or like I said for the other properties, I could specify margin top, margin bottom, margin left, and margin right. If I don't specify the direction of the margin, and I just say margin, it goes around like a clock. So this says 40 pixels on top, automatic set the margin on the right. 40 pixels on the bottom, automatic set 40 pixels on the left. It's like a clock. It starts at the top and it goes around. So this would be the top, this would be the right, this would be the top, and this would be the left. And the effect of putting auto in automatically sets the margin to make sure that it's centered. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to make the margin 0 pixels. So 0 pixels on the top, 0 pixels on the bottom, but auto on the right and left. So there'll be no space between the boxes vertically. And I'll do this for all of them. Those are the basic parts of the box model. Border, padding, margin, width. You also have height, but oftentimes you don't make the height an attribute because what happens if it gets bigger than that? What happens if there's more content than needed? So I would say height is 200 pixels. What if there's more content than 200 pixels worth? It sort of screws it up. So I leave the height not set to anything. Now, I can also use percentage. In fact, percentages are preferred. So instead of a width of 600 pixels, I can say a width of 60%. So here's my page. If I make this smaller, that space gets smaller. If I make it bigger, that space makes bigger. This is the first step in what is called creating adaptive or responsive web pages. Because if you're viewing this web page on a phone, you're not going to have necessarily as many columns. But if you're viewing it on a browser that has a big window, you have more space going across horizontally. Now I can make a couple other tweaks and make this look nice. I could, for example, set the background color of the whole page to white. Maybe set this to a darker gray. Set this one to the lighter gray. And set this one to an in-between the two. So this is very basic. This isn't very elaborate, but it's the start of really making something that looks closer to a professional web page than just the stuff that we did coming into this. Now there's other things that we can do too. We could change fonts and so on, but we'll leave that to another day. All right. Okay, I will upload this example. That's all I had for today. Are there any questions? If anyone wants to, they can either come to lab or attend the virtual lab. I'll be set up in a couple of minutes over there. I probably just need to stop and get a bottle of water and all that. So at 10 o'clock or shortly after 10, I should be in the room again. All right, that's all I had for today. We'll see you next week.